Welcome to our monthly Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast. I'm your host, Amy Forsyth, and I'll be here on the first of each month with guests who provide expertise, resources, and peer-to-peer support as part of the American Legion Be the One initiative to prevent suicide within the veteran community. On the first day of every month, American Legion family members are encouraged to wear Be the One apparel to publicly show their commitment to reducing the stigma around mental health issues. During this episode, we discuss topics that may be troubling for some. If you or a veteran you know is in crisis, call the Veterans Crisis Line at 988 and press 1. Go to betheone.org to learn how you can be the one to save one veteran. Let's get today's conversation started. Hi, everyone. Today, our guest is Jerri Reed, a retired history professor who raised 4 sons in Chicago. 2 of them, Casey Reed and Cody Comacho, served and deployed in Iraq during Iraqi freedom. We are so happy to welcome her to the Be the One podcast. Jerri, thanks so much for joining us today. Your story is amazing, and we really appreciate your patience in coming on and being willing to share this very personal and touching story to you. Welcome to Be the One podcast.
Hi, I'm really happy to be here. My son Cody, who I'll be talking about, he was very active in the American Legion chapter in Des Plaines, and at the time of his death, he was oh gosh, the vice commander. That's what I couldn't think of his title. So I'm really happy to share with other people in the Legion what I'm working on concerning Cody's suicide in 2021.
Well, here at the Be the One podcast, we talk to a variety of different people who have been touched by suicide, people, doctors, scientists, and even family members like yourself who have experienced this traumatic event in your family, and your son who had served, who committed suicide in 2021. And you have really ingrained yourself now in this effort to alert other family members. But before we get into that story, would you like to tell us a little bit more about you and your background and raising 4 sons? That must have been a challenge, but a blessing, of course, and 2 who went on to serve in the Army.
Yeah, I raised all 4 of them. I did work. And then I went back to school and became a history professor, which I taught history here in Oklahoma, where I live now, for about 20 years, probably over 20 years. So I have a great interest in history and wars and public affairs and things like that. So I guess compared to other parents, I have more. I write things, and I felt that I had the ability to do something when Cody died. Cody did join the Army. I wanted to correct you just a little bit. My other son, Casey Reed, who's somewhat younger than Cody, he was in Iraq in 2014-15. He had a different experience, but Cody went in with the invasion in 2003. He joined the Army in 99, right after he graduated from high school. I believe it was 9. I'm so mixed up. And served in Germany, and then was deployed to Iraq. As he was Signal Corps, and he was assigned to different. He went in with an artillery unit from Germany, and then he basically was stationed at the Abu Ghraib prison to provide communication support. For most of the time he was there for a year. And they were martyred every day. There were a lot of things that happened. Not all of them. Some of them I really don't know, because a lot of times veterans don't like to tell family members about their worst experiences. But he
Well,
did have.
for people listening who don't know what the Abu Ghraib prison is, so in 2003, 2004, the Abu Ghraib prison was a place where the where the U.S. service members were guarding the prison, and these were some of the most the terrorists, the insurgents. These were where we were
Oh,
holding and detaining
there were a
people.
lot of different people there, or some of them were just common criminals. This is according to Cody. But it was a very intense situation. That first year was very intense anyways. But if you remember, and this happened, although Cody did not know about it, when he left Iraq was when the news broke that there was torture there. And this was kind of like an added mental problem for our family, to just know and I didn't like him being there. I mean, I didn't. It's just something about the whole situation. So he had severe PTSD after this experience. He turned 21 at Abu Ghraib, so he was very young when he went. And he left the army and did not get a lot of help, other than they do kind of like exit interviews, like when you leave a job. And I was the one. He stayed. I was in Oklahoma and he stayed in Chicago by his choice. But I was the one who dealt with his PTSD long distance, either on the phone. He'd call me every day, just ranting and raving. He had a lot of issues, as many did. He couldn't take public transportation. He just couldn't get a job. This is a kid that worked since he was 12. He found some kind of little jobs to do. And he eventually went back to Germany and went back to the army and served in the reserves, in human resources until 2017. And his PTSD persisted. It was quite serious, but he did get better, obviously, than when he was first out. And he came back here, married his childhood sweetheart, and had two daughters. At the time of his death, the youngest was 7 and his oldest was 12. So he left. He bought a house. He was able, despite his PTSD, he worked. He had problems, since the pandemic. He was kind of out of work, but he was actually doing really well. He was healthy. He had lost weight. He was doing really well. I saw him the month before he died, and in August, he just was doing better than he had for years.
Well, your family story isn't, sadly, is unique, but there are other families also suffering from this. And so have you been able to connect with other families who have had a veteran who've committed suicide?
Well, I always did know people who had veterans who committed suicide, but in Cody's particular case, which is what I was getting to, he started having problems. It was common for him to have issues in the fall for whatever reason. And he started having some severe PTSD symptoms, and he went to the VA and he was put on anti-psychotics. This was about 6 weeks before he died. So yes, I know other people whose kids have killed themselves, certainly. But this was a particular circumstance because he went for help. He really was. I don't believe that he was suicidal before he started taking these drugs, and I think these drugs started making him worse. We did realize this right after his death. In fact, I knew that. I talked to the police right the day that they found him, November 2nd, 2021. I talked to the detective on the phone, and that's one of the first things I said. I said, "Oh, I know the VA changed his medication last week." So this was on a new medication. We found the pills and counted. There were 7 of them gone. It's called risperidone. It is an antipsychotic that is actually for schizophrenics, and it's used off-label for PTSD by the VA. And when I read and finding people who've had this experience is really hard, because I tried, I mean, this is going to be the 3rd year in November, 3 years that he's been gone. And I'm just now finding other people who are working on this issue.
So
I tried.
yeah, it's still very fresh for your family. Now, with Cody's particular situation, had he been treated by the VA for the whole time, or did he have any outside medical attention?
He started with the vet centers, and I don't have the medical vet centers are connected to the VA, but they're separate. I don't have the record from there, but I think it was around 2015 or 16. And then he was at Hines VA in Chicago when he died. And yes, he'd been going for counseling regularly. So he went and saw his counselor, and he actually went to the emergency room because of his behavior was so, it was just strange. His wife told me, I asked her, was it threatening? And she said, no, it was just, he did some really strange things, and he was very agitated and had a lot of anxiety, to the point where one of his friends from the Legion drove him to the VA, to the emergency room. And this was September 27th, and he was dead within like almost little more than a month after starting taking these drugs. When I read the side effects, both of the drugs that he took had box warnings for suicidal ideation. He was on 2 different drugs. One, it's commonly known as Abilify. He was on and a lot of people do take that. It's been used extensively. It is an antipsychotic, but it's been used for other things. And risperidone, and both of them have warnings for suicidal ideation. But in addition to that, a lot of the side effects that are listed, and I read this right away, and I said this had something to do with Cody's death. They look like the symptoms of PTSD. Things like agitation, restlessness, pacing. One which he described to me, and let's see if I get the name right. It's called tardive dyskinesis. And there's different names, and it's a movement disorder that often people might notice in schizophrenics, that you can't control your arms and legs. And he had described this happening to him while he was taking these drugs. And he continued to go to the VA. So he was not like withdrawn or out there, but he was telling people really weird things. He was not acting like himself. And then he took a gun and went to a hotel room on November 1st, and they found him on November 2nd. And he just wasn't, he was very devoted to his girls. I mean, he was certainly one of these modern fathers. He was somebody that spent a lot of time with them. And that was just the most important thing to him. And for him that was the first thing that everybody said. He had many friends, many close friends, not what you would think of, or like the stereotype of someone who is suicidal, who's withdrawn and stays away from people. Cody just wasn't like that. He was a very much a people person. And everybody said he just wouldn't leave the girls like that. And he just walked
Jerri,
out of his life.
Thank you for sharing that very personal story about Cody. Can you talk more about his connection to the American Legion and how you've picked up the mantle and continue to carry this message forward?
He bought a house in Des Plaines, Illinois in 2016 and started going to the American Legion chapter there because he was looking for a vets thing, and they're pretty active in the community. So he got pretty active in the community and got the kids involved, his family going to Legion events. And he really added to it because he was quite a bit younger than I think all of the other members. There may be some younger members, but he was quite a bit younger, so he had more energy. He knew about the web, so he got their like their social media and website and stuff. That was one of the things that he worked on. And he also the Legion they have certain things that they do. They had shop with a vet. I don't know if all Legion chapters do that, but that was around Thanksgiving. It was working with Sam's Club, getting food for families for Thanksgiving. That was one of the big things that he did. And they honored him. Sam's Club made t-shirts for the family. I have one that was very nice of them on the first anniversary of his death. Because he just got to know a lot of people. He was a very friendly and likable person. And he also started doing things like getting more women included in the Legion. They had some panels about women vets and things that younger people, interests that they had. So he became very active.
Well, that's good to hear. That sounds like that was a great place for him to reconnect with other military members or veterans. And so here at Be the One and throughout the American Legion, Be the One is identifying people who can be the one and how to train those people to look out for suicidal ideation or symptoms that people may display. And so, and with the VA in partnership and a kind of a stacked hands, comprehensive approach about this, do you feel that through discussion and education and training that we're on the right track? Or what advice would you give other family members and maybe American Legion veterans members and the VA? How can we do better, say, for someone like Cody's situation?
Well, I really think there is a lot of awareness, but in Cody's situation, Cody really wasn't suicidal and didn't show symptoms of suicide to people. He was started taking these drugs. And I'm part of a campaign now, which the Legion, I don't know if you know Derek Bloomkey from Michigan. He along with Tim Jenkins from it's the Grunt Style Foundation, and in Michigan, in fact, we're going to have a veteran summit about these issues in next month. That's backed by one of the sponsors is the Michigan Legion. It's going to be along with the VFW in Michigan. So the Legion is working with kind of a national coalition on this issue, this drug issue. Which it's not just suicide, but it causes a lot of pain for a lot of vets who end up on these drugs because they do have some really serious side effects. And one of the things that, in fact, one of the main things that we're asking, and there's going to be more about this, we're kind of just getting started, is that veterans who are prescribed these by the VA have a signed consent form that the doctors, in fact, that first you have to train the doctors and health professionals about the risks of these drugs, because they don't always know, or they don't always consider this for some reason. And a signed consent form, this is like something you sign when you go into surgery, that that says there's so much percent risk of death or whatever you sign, but that would inform veterans so they can make an informed decision about taking these drugs instead of just the number of psychiatric drugs that are given. Because Cody, the problem, there's a real problem. Cody was given drugs. He was obviously in a crisis, and he had no other. He did go and see his regular therapist. I've read he didn't really get evaluated for what was going on with him. This was not normal behavior. It was not a normal PTSD episode. And there was no real evaluation between, he took the drugs. He mainly got drugs. Why this is, that's another story. Is the VA just stretched? I really don't know. So one of the things that of this campaign is to first publicize to people in general the risks of these drugs that are known, that many veterans know about this. The other thing is I can't say this word, de-prescribing guidelines, which there aren't any. If you go off of these drugs, and this is not just the anti-psychotics Cody was taking. He in fact had problems with Zoloft, which is an SSRI, and it's kind of an antidepressant. When you go off of those drugs, you can have horrible side effects, including suicidal thoughts. And he had tried Zoloft some years before, around 2015 or 16, and he took himself off. You have to go off. There's a certain way that you have to stop taking them, or you're going to have some real pain. So this is one of the other things that we're working on, and that can lead people to suicide, and has. Those are some, and in the case of Cody, the way this happened, I had talked to Derek sometime in the past, and since Cody died, I had got in touch with him, and then I was contacted earlier this year when this campaign started between the Grunt Style Foundation and it's actually a webpage called Mad in America, which deals with drugs and mental health drugs and their side effects, and Derek had been connected with them, and he met Tim Jenkins maybe at the Legion convention. I don't remember. I know they both went to that this year. And they got together and put together something called War Cry for Change. We're starting off, what we're really trying to do, and that's one reason I'm willing to talk about these personal family matters, is because that will help because people don't like to talk about these things. People don't even like, if they have a suicide in their family, there's kind of a sense of shame that you want to, in the first place, it's traumatic. It's a traumatic event for the families to go through. So it's to encourage people, and if people do have a story to tell concerning this, they can go to the Grunt Style Foundation webpage, and there's a form to fill out. So we've been getting other people who are reading our stories, and this is part of the problem, because I looked for 3 years and it was so difficult to find anything out. Just as a person, there are statistics about suicides, but in terms of finding the stories or the number of people who might have been on these drugs, I really couldn't find anyone. So we're publicizing this in order to find other people, because people were really discouraged. Some family members may not know, it feels overwhelming. The VA is a huge organization. I think it's the largest medical organization in the whole world. And you can't fight the VA. So they may have had experiences like this and not even known what to do. And it's like with the burn pit legislation that was just passed. And I know the Legion worked on that. That's something Derek worked on along with the VFW. It took a lot of people and took years. It took years to get that. So this is a new campaign. to address the overuse of psychiatric drugs. And some of these drugs are like the ones Cody took, are used off-label. Some of them medical professionals, there's kind of a disagreement, but there are medical professionals who think that this is really not the way to treat the PTSD, and that it's not, it doesn't really treat the cause. There are other non-drug ways to treat PTSD that can be explored. So these are some of the things that we're pushing for. And in October, is it October? On Tuesday, October 15th, for those Legion people in Michigan, and the Michigan Legion is part of sponsoring this. There's going to be a Veterans Summit in at it's the VFW home south of Lansing. I'm terrible. I don't have, we're going to get the information so it could be on the website, because there is a sign up for this for anyone in Michigan who would like to attend. I'm going to go, here, Michigan.
The title is called
Reduction Summit, exploring the relationship between medication and suicide. And this is going to be a day-long conference. I will be going to it and speaking on a panel about Cody, because that's what I can do. It's my testimony. Sometimes when you're a family and you're dealing with something big like this, like you feel like, I don't feel like it should have happened this way, but what can I do? I have my story that I can tell. I mean, I can contribute in that way.
Well, Jerri, you mentioned Mad in America. I can point people to the website and an article that you authored with a title called Green Star Mother Demands Answers from VA Secretary, which I hadn't heard that term, called Green Star Family. So thank you for sharing that. So we can now use that in terms of how to share and describe our veterans who have committed suicide. And in your letter and in this article, you have authored a letter on March 11th of this year, 2024, to Secretary of the VA, McDonough. And can you describe that letter and what it is you want people to know? They can read for themselves, but in your own words, how would you sum up your demands for answers and for the VA to take accountability or look at this more closely? Describe that, please.
Well, we're still waiting to hear back from Secretary McDonough. I was so, you just don't know what that meant for me. I've written to just dozens, because you can write to Congress people. You're never going to hear from them if you're not their constituent. But I wrote to everyone I could think of, the people who are on the Veterans Affairs. I did a lot of things on my own and really didn't get anywhere, because I didn't know what else to do. So in March, Derek said, and this is this coalition that he's working with, they're going to meet with the Secretary of the Veterans Administration. He's like, I want to hand deliver a letter from you. So I wrote a letter and gave it to him, and he brought it to him and gave it to him. And I just felt like, my gosh, it just felt like a step forward finally, after all this time. This letter is asking him what we're asking this over. I don't know that there was an investigation into Cody's death. I've not been able to find statistics from the VA on things like veterans who committed suicide who were taking these drugs. I have a lot of questions from the drugs. I did go, in fact, and a lot of people, if you're a veteran, especially like 20 years out, your family's not going to think to contact the VA, but I did. And we went and talked to his therapist, and I think this was actually his supervisor, the person who's the head of the suicide prevention program there. And they didn't really have anything to say about the drugs. And in fact, it's like I didn't get a response that, we're going to look into this. It's like, this is over now. So that's the basics from the letter. But really, when I wrote the article, I added things in, like the prescribing guidelines, investigations into these deaths. You have to do, to me, more investigation, because you have to figure out why all of these people are dying. I'm sure a lot of people who are listening to this realize more people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan took their own lives than were killed in combat. It's been overwhelming, and it continues. It's not over. You know, this is there needs to be more investigation of each individual death. And there was not even an autopsy on Cody, so we don't know what was in his body at the time, you know, in terms of the drugs, what the level was of the drugs, which drugs, if he had been drinking, you know, if he, and this is something else that has to be considered, because when these veterans get these drugs through the mail, they just automatically go to them. People have stockpiled them. Cody stockpiled them once. He had agreed. He felt legally he did not have to take these drugs, but he felt that he had to show he was complying. You know, he had been kind of pressured into taking an anti-psychotic before, and he never took it, because I went to his house and he had them lined up on a shelf in the basement. I'm like, Cody, why do you have all these drugs here? And he's like, oh, you know, I told him I'm taking them because he felt that he had to show that he complied. And this is, a lot of veterans do feel that way. He told them originally, when I read the medical records, he didn't want to take them. And then the therapist wrote, oh, I gently persuaded Cody he should take these drugs. And then Cody agreed, but he never took them at that time. He did take them this time. Like I said, he may have been weaning himself off, so we don't know the amounts of drugs that were in his body. You know, we don't know anything. At the time, I never would have thought, well, I assumed wrongly that there would be an autopsy, and there wasn't. So there needs to be investigation of these deaths.
Well, we appreciate you bringing this to the front, and American Legion in this podcast. We're trying to talk to people, connect the dots, help people connect with each other, and share what your personal story and now your advocacy for this very important topic of the devastation, really, and the pull the thread on precisely how this happened and hold people accountable through writing letters and having this summit where hopefully we can get some answers and help the VA piece this together and make other veterans aware of the dangers of prescription drugs, whether the side effects or combining too many drugs together, and those harmful side effects that have just been devastating for so many families.
Well, it's people at least need to know. And a lot of veterans do know this. I know many veterans, and I know a lot of veterans know about this. And the drugs have not helped a lot of people. They have helped some people. I'm not, you know, but they need to be used much more carefully. And in Cody's case, I don't know why he took them, because after he took Zoloft earlier, he didn't want to take drugs again because it was so horrible going off of them. And he had, and this is actually from the father of a Navy veteran who took his own life, that I met at an event. And he said, you know, Cody got up and dealt with his PTSD for 20 years. And he took these drugs for like 6 weeks, a month to 6 weeks, and he was gone. So he went for 20 years without drugs and managing to raise his family and buy a home and take care of day-to-day life. And then he started taking these drugs. He just was no longer himself. The change in him was really big.
Well, hopefully with the bringing awareness, like people like you who want answers and are pressing the VA for more accountability, Big Pharma has a role to play, and then being, you know, awareness for us as veterans to help caution other veterans and bring this to the front. I don't think it's we're talking about it enough in terms of the dangers that come with any pharmaceuticals, any prescription medicines. And then this can be a way to help people know. So before we close, what else would you like people to know? Thank you so much for sharing Cody's personal story and your fight to get answers and to help prevent this from happening to another family.
Well, I want to encourage people to go to the website. It's madinamerica.com. That one I know. Grunt Style Foundation. I always look up the name. I should know the website, right? But you'll be able to see the blog, actually links to the articles that I've written. Another woman a veteran herself that has had her experiences, Diana, her articles are linked on the Grunt Style page. But especially this forum, War Cry for Change, you can find that forum if you would like to share your story. And I really want to thank the Legion for doing this podcast and for helping to sponsor this Michigan event next month. The Legion did a lot for Cody. It was very important to him. And since his death, it really hit his other Legion members very hard. And they have, several of them have been working on suicide issues more, sponsoring forums about suicide and finding ways that they can help with this epidemic. This is just one aspect of it. It's not always drugs, but how much of the time it is these drugs for people who are seeking treatment. Cody didn't want to kill himself. He wanted to get better. He went over and over. During the time he was on these drugs, he went to the VA at least once a week. He was at the VA the 2 or 3 days before he died. It's not what you would expect of someone who's actively suicidal.
Well, then sadly, thank you for sharing, but sadly, there's probably a veteran right now struggling with the same thing and trying to make sense of the drugs they're being prescribed right now and how much to take and what other alternative therapies are out there. But we appreciate your time and coming on today and sharing your personal story and your advocacy and keeping up the fight in terms of getting answers and helping educate other people. madinamerica.com. You can find more. Thank you, Jerri Reed, so much for coming on and making this having this conversation.
Okay, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much for being our guest today and sharing this with our listeners. And thank you, Alphas, for tuning in to the Tango Alpha Lima Be the One podcast. Remember, you can be the one to save one veteran. Find resources and more information at betheone.org and connect with the American Legion on social media to keep this conversation going. Don't forget to subscribe to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. And please share our podcast with others. And we'll see you on the next edition of Be the One podcast on the 1st of every month. Thank you so much. On the first day of every month, American Legion family members are encouraged to wear Be the One apparel to publicly show their commitment to reducing the stigma around mental health issues. Go to betheone.org to learn how you can be the one to save one veteran. If you're a veteran in crisis or concerned about one, call the Veterans Crisis Line at 988 and press 1. You're not alone. The Veterans Crisis Line is here for you, and you don't have to be enrolled in the VA. Help is available, and speak with someone today.